And today we welcome Lauren Patterson as our speaker for today's Adult Forum. I know it's a beautiful day out there, and so we're glad that you're here, that you've taken time, because she is an amazing leader in our community. Has always been impressive since I first met her, and seeing how she's working in our community to bring people together, bring different organizations and parts of the community together to be a coordinated effort to make this a healthier, a more peaceful community. And so I just want you to read her, I guess I could say a few things about Laura. She joined the New Canaan Community Foundation as president and CEO in 2016. So how many years is that? That's 8 years, right? Has over 17 years of experience in community philanthropy and is passionate about building relationships, growing impactful philanthropy, and thoughtfully supporting work in community. Prior to her current role, she worked and lived in Washington, D.C. How was that? Oh, wow. Serving as Director of Programs at Washington Area Women's Foundation, where she led the foundation's grant-making, advocacy, and research on the economic security of women and girls. Thank you for that. And at the Community Foundation for Montgomery County, where she managed grant-making and donor engagement. Lauren has worked with or served on many coalitions, cross-sector efforts, and funders collaboratives, including the Early Care and Education Funders Collaborative, the Greater Washington Workforce Development Collaborative, and the Ascend Network of the Aspen Institute. She recently completed service on the board of the Connecticut Council for Philanthropy, the statewide association of grantmakers. I just want to say, too, that, again, I've seen her in action trying to bring different leaders together and to build community. And I don't know if you know this, but our upcoming stewardship campaign is going to be building community. And so I'm kind of taking notes from Lauren and see how she's doing that. And today I hope she's going to talk a little bit about the Community Foundation so we know what the Community Foundation of New Canaan really is. And then also, really importantly, she's going to talk about the Health and Wellbeing Survey that we want everybody to participate in, and not just people in this room, but we talk to our friends and family and get them, if you're citizens of New Canaan, to participate in that survey. So join me in welcoming Lauren. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Scott, and thank you all for being here on just a beautiful Sunday. I promise to be a good use of time, and we'll have plenty of time for Q&A and discussion, and if not, I'll leave you to the beautiful day. So for today, I want to share a little bit about myself, just for some context on the way that I approach work in this community, partially my community. I'll share about the Community Foundation, a little bit about our history and our priorities, and then, as Scott referenced, get into our behavioral health work, and in particular, the work of a really broad and impressive alliance of 30+ organizations in town, of which the Community Foundation is just one, but we're really, really excited about the work of this group, and particularly a survey process they have going on this month that you don't need to pay attention to the slides for a while, but this is just helpful for the visual learners when we get to the survey portion of the discussion. My caveat today is I have had a cough, as Kim, my coworker, knows, for a month now. I am not sick. Don't be freaked out that I'm here. I've seen a doctor. It's not COVID. I have a 3-year-old. She had a cough a month ago, and it's just stuck with mom. And so I've got my tea. I've got my cough drops. Hopefully I don't need any of that, but forgive me if I have to take a break for a second just to clear my throat. So about me. So I grew up in northern New Jersey, in Bergen County, a community I would say that's a lot like New Canaan. My family is still there, actually. But that was part of what, when I eventually came to New Canaan, it felt like home, right? It reminded me of things familiar. And as a community, as a place that I could identify with, but also think about what would have been useful for the community where I grew up, just as I could approach New Canaan with fresh eyes. So I grew up in New Jersey, went to school in Massachusetts, and then when I was an undergrad there, I took an internship, which ended up being really important in my kind of trajectory, at the DC Commission on the Arts and Humanities. So it was just a summer internship in DC, and I was an arts minor in college, I should mention that, because when I grew up in New Jersey, I was very much kind of a shy, quiet kid, and the arts were my outlet. And luckily, I grew up in a public school system that was well-resourced, and I had access to talented arts programs. I had a stay-at-home mom who was also kind of a dabbling artist, And so we had every craft supply under the sun that I could get my hands into. And this was this great part of my relationship building with my friends and family. This was an important outlet for me. And then obviously when I got out of the bubble though, of that community where I grew up, I saw, wow, not all families are set up like that. Not all school systems are set up like that. How would I have functioned and found my outlet if I were that shy kid? What would my trajectory have been? And so I was really interested in arts access, right? How could I help other kids and communities access what I felt like was so important in my own development? So I took this arts internship, and it's a quasi-government organization. So it's essentially funded from the district government, but it's a grant-making organization. So this is my first exposure to working in a grant maker, a foundation, if you will, someone who was allocating resources to the community. And I was the lowly intern, right? So I was answering the phones and the info at email address and that kind of thing. But I was working on 2 grants programs, and one was for individual artists who wanted to do public art installations in the city. And the other was called the East of the River Initiative. And East of the River was, for those of you familiar with DC, Anacostia, Ward 7 and 8, really a disadvantaged, under-resourced part of the community. And as unfortunately often happens in kind of cities, you have a river, you have a highway, you have something that's like a literal wrong side of the railroad tracks, right? So it's under-resourced. The people there are having very different experiences than the rest of the city, even if that city is prospering. So one of these initiatives was getting grants into nonprofit organizations doing work east of the river. And what was so gratifying, even the few months that I was the young intern in the office, you could see I answered questions from individual artists and very small nonprofits. How do I craft a budget? Can I come in and use your copy machine, your fax machine? Can I collate? To seeing them then go before a grant panel of experts and watching them fund the things that they were compelled by, and then seeing those things come to fruition in the community. So it was so gratifying to be behind the scenes and help people just navigate how do you connect with the resources that are out there. So flash forward, I graduated from college and moved to DC because I loved that area and said I want to make a life there. And I thought I still wanted to go the arts route, but because I also had this grant-making experience, I was able to apply to foundation work. And I was really fortunate to get a job at a community foundation in Montgomery County, Maryland. So Montgomery County, also a lot like Fairfield County, also a lot like Bergen County where I grew up, lots of wealth, lots of low-income communities also. And so you're always kind of straddling 2 worlds and negotiating what are priorities for different communities. So I worked there for a couple of years, did a lot of grant making that focused on lower income populations, and was so motivated by that work that then I went to the Women's Foundation, where all of our work focused on workforce development, asset building, early childhood initiatives, but particularly for low income women and girls. I think it's notable just to know this background. I've always worked at public foundations. I've always been responsible for raising the money that then is being granted into the community and for running collaboratives. Nothing could get done in isolation. These are smaller organizations, right? So we were in the Gates Foundation. We were in a big city government. We were these smaller, scrappy, but really community-based, issue-based partner organizations. So some of what we were doing always was giving money to good projects. We were also spending our time as people, getting our board, our volunteers, influencing decision makers because we could see outsized impact if we could influence what other people were doing and not just what we were doing in these smaller organizations. So, 10 or so years go by. My husband and I marry, we live in a high-rise, we got a dog. It's time to put down roots, and both of our families are up this way. So there was the move back up northeast, and I looked for a long time because I really wanted to stay in that community foundation field that I feel is so important. And when I came to New Canaan, as I referenced, it immediately kind of hit like, oh, okay, this is familiar, right? Like this feels homey. I feel like, gosh, the people are so friendly. I can really kind of get a sense of myself here. And it was also really telling. There was a hiring panel of probably 7 former board chairs for the foundation. So that told me a lot about the pride in this organization, the strength of civic leadership in town, and gosh, if you had a community that was leaning in that far to its community foundation work, this is somewhere you could really get some great work done as a community. So we made the leap up here. It's, as Scott referenced, it's been 8 years now. It's been gone by in a flash. COVID years, right, are all a blur. But it's been fantastic. And I would say what I want to share about the Community Foundation is maybe where I kind of fall in this longer history. We're coming up on our 50th anniversary, actually, in a few years. So we were founded in 1977. We were an all-volunteer-run organization for a long time. There's only been staff at the foundation for just shy of 25 years now, so we're still young in the scheme of things. Community foundations, if you don't know, there are hundreds of us all over the country. It's very unique that New Canaan as a town has its own community foundation. Often they're regional or even statewide, but they're always place-based. So New Canaan is actually the only independent community foundation in Fairfield County. There used to be many, and they have often kind of merged and collaborated, but New Canaan has retained its individual identity, which is also, I think, really telling about New Canaan. So at this point, we're about 29 million in assets, so we're very small in terms of a community foundation. There are community foundations out there with $1 billion in assets. But I love that we're small and we're nimble. And it gives us flexibility to say, here's what we have been, but here's what we're going to be going forward. And I'm also really proud, so annually, many of you might know, we do an annual grant cycle. We have 115 or so organizations every year that come to us for funding. And we've gotten our annual grant making, for years running now, it's over $2 million. This past year that we just closed out, June 30th, it's just shy of $3 million. So I feel like as an organization that's still asset base is smaller, that we're really kind of punching above our weight. And that's really to the thanks to the generosity of this community. We have a very small endowment that we draw from annually, but primarily people all over the community are chipping in $10, $1,000, all variety, different digits in there. And they're chipping in because they're putting a bet on that collective effort. Right? They might be individually in their families or their businesses making their own bets on causes that are really close to their heart, their family's heart. But they're saying, okay, there's something going on in this community. I want to do this with my neighbors. And then I want to rely upon the Community Foundation to see that bigger universe of 115 organizations every year and see it over time, right? So there's some organizations we've been funding for almost that 50-year stretch. And then there's others, every year we add a couple or rotate people through. We're trying pilot programs. There's startup organizations. There's things that we're really proud of that we funded way back when they were, one founder with a vision and a box of stuff, of paperwork in a file box and a landline. And now they're really sophisticated organizations that have scaled. And they're reaching lots of people. So we in our history have kind of grown to this point where the annual grant making obviously is really important for us, right? This is where we're mobilizing our community's dollars. I should say we have about 150 volunteers every year that power what we're doing. That's in addition to our board of 24 people who are also fabulous community leaders. But those 100 plus people, the volunteers in our community, what they're doing, they're fanning out. We organize them into teams, and they're working with us to vet all of those applications for funding that come in. So there's plenty of sorting and things that go on at the staff level and the board level. Strategically, what are we trying to accomplish? But it's that volunteer power, and really that's giving it the true shake, right? You have teams of community members going out and saying, okay, I'm looking at 6 organizations, and they're all working in the health space. Who's rising to the top of this field? Where do I feel like these resources would be most impactful? Where do I want my community's collective dollars to be invested? And those volunteer teams are then making recommendations that go straight to the board, and the board pretty much goes with those because there's a lot of power in that broad view from the volunteer base. And the teams are always, 5, 10 people, so you have all different perspectives and people weighing in with their different professional or life experience and what they think are the values that we should be putting forth. where our community's dollars go. So this grant making is really, really important for us. But there's something that's also grown out, which is the concept of community leadership, which is very jargony, but it's something recognized even in the community foundation field. What it essentially is saying that as a community foundation, you have the privilege of this bird's eye view. You have the privilege of partnering with nonprofits, with government leaders, with individual philanthropists, with business. You can set a table to bring people together around an issue. You don't, as the community foundation, you don't have to be an expert in it, right? We're not a health foundation, we're not an arts foundation. We are broad and responsive to our community's needs. But we do have the benefit of all these different relationships and the history and the specifics of this place that we can draw people together around a common table. Unfortunately, most times they show up. They say, okay, yes, the community foundation's doing it, let's hear what's going on. So an example of this that I'll talk more about is our work in the behavioral health space. That's really been something since I got here to town in 2016. I'm comfortable being a fish out of water in a community and just kind of learning about a community. And so I just had lots of lunch conversations and coffees and you name it. And just said, hey, you know, what's going on in town that is changing over time? What are you concerned about? What's different? Or maybe what's not different? What's something you've been worried about for a while, or people have tried putting resources towards something and it's just a sticky issue. It's not moving like you'd hope. And no one said behavioral health, right? Because that's also a jargony term. But people talked about kind of the relative level of stress and anxiety that they were seeing in the student population. Or they're talking about family stressors. Or the opioid epidemic was very much in the national news. I really remember Canaan Cares, for those of you that know, it's a great kind of prevention and family serving organization in town. And their previous executive director, Meg Domino, who was in that position for some time, said, you know, the top thing my second grade teachers are asking for right now is stress management for their kids. And I thought, what's happening with second graders, right? So it felt like a real opportunity to kind of go upstream and figure out like what was trickling down to have this community-wide effect that, you know, it nationally is showing up in certain ways and then locally it's very much here. And so as I said, you know, community foundation doesn't have to be an expert. I'm not a public health expert, I'm not a clinician, but I could ask questions and I could hopefully bring some of the right people together. So as part of our annual grant cycle, what we started to do was just sort of peel off anything that was in that issue area. So we could look at it more closely, talk to more leaders and community folks who are working in that space and just understand it better. And then slowly over the years, we've inched up our grant making in that area to be funding more mental health services, to be doing more outreach and prevention work, to allow those organizations to really strengthen and grow because they're doing tremendously hard work and it's a really challenging system. What we also did in 2019 was we hosted 2 different planning sessions, and they brought together about 50 or 60 people at a time. And Scott, you referenced, you know, community building, what does this look like? 50 or 60 people at a time in the old basement of the library in the land room, and had table rounds, and we had assigned seating. And so we thought, okay, if there's 7 or 8 people at each table, and they work on this issue broadly, but they don't normally talk to each other, let's put them together, right? And then let's facilitate a kind of a whiteboard session. And let's draw out from those tables what are challenges, what are opportunities, where if we put our collective resources and try to move the needle on 1 or 2 things, like what would that be? You could get those people agreeing. So superintendent sitting next to the Boy Scouts leader, next to a faith community leader, next to a nonprofit, the police chief, right? If they could agree that, yeah, this would have some impact and could maybe have some legs in town, maybe we'd be onto something. And so the top 3 priorities they came up with, I will say, fast forward to today, still hold. So one was, we don't have hyper-local data. We have federal data, we have state data, we don't have New Canaan specific information on how we're faring on things across mental health and well-being. So stick a pin in that. We're gonna come back to that with the survey because now finally we're getting to that goal. The second thing was access to care. We are program rich locally. We are resource rich, we're program rich locally. It is a dizzying array of services to navigate, and particularly when you or a loved one might be in crisis, it's not the time to be pulling up a website and Googling and leaving messages all over the place and dialing every number you can think of. Most people were going to a trusted friend, maybe the schools, maybe their faith community, and asking for a resource. But it was not a coordinated system. So if there was anything we could do to streamline that and organize that for the general layperson in the community, that would be really important. And then the third thing was stigma. Was there anything we could do to just talk about this more openly? I do think the pandemic, for better or for worse, made it easier to talk about a lot of these things because everyone went, oh, I get it, or we're seeing this now at a broad population scale with working parents, with the elderly who are homebound and really vulnerable, or with students who, are still trying to make up gains, not just in terms of their education, but their social and emotional development at this point. So those were the three things that group came up with, and we've been really running with those things. We keep checking in, are these still the right things or not? And they still kind of are on track. I will say in terms of the access to care piece, I know Dr. Gerber from Silver Hill Hospital has been here to speak before. So the urgent assessment program, for example, was something we were kind of behind the scenes on, but really was an important innovation for our community. That's an example of an innovation in the access to care question, right? Could you relieve some of the bottlenecks in the system? So in that case, it's saying, okay, Silver Hill Hospital has the urgent assessment program. You call, you're seen within 24 to 48 hours, you get a 3-hour or so expert assessment, and you're a warm handoff to a provider who meets your particular needs, your insurance needs, is expecting your call, has the availability, right? This is removing bottlenecks that show up in a couple of different ways in the mental health system. So we've been investing in that heavily now the last few years. We now also, later this month, we'll be making new grants that are specific to kind of systems change efforts, which I think is going to look a lot like some research work that could help organizations advocate for what they need to better improve the system of care for residents. And then there's also a lot that's kind of a mess in the mental health workforce space. It's really, really hard for nonprofit clinics, for example, to hold on to providers. It's much more beneficial for them to go into private practice. A lot of that goes into insurance implications and parity between physical health care and mental health care and what the reimbursement rates are for these services, coverage levels. But there's more that we're hoping we can push on in that workforce space. So for example, could you think about boosting the pipeline in, right? Could we support more internships, fellowships, things that would get more people into those positions and then maybe keep them for a little bit longer in those health clinics where people are generally really desperate to access service, for example. So community leadership, I will say, is very important to the Community Foundation. It's something we're really looking to lean into as we go forward as an organization. Behavioral health is sort of the focus today, but there was other examples of this. So the COVID response fund, we stood up March 17th, I want to say, or March 20th. It was a few days within the stay-at-home orders from the governor. The fact that we had an institution in town who could immediately stand up the structure, brought in, this community gave over $750,000 into that fund, and then we had rapid response grants. So by mid-April, I want to say, we had a first round of grants out to nonprofit organizations. And we had another one in June, and then we had another one in July. Like, we just kept going, we could be responsive. And it's really to great credit to this community that the generosity is there. And if we could funnel all of those things strategically, right? We could be pushing things forward on one hand that we've been working at a long time, but we also need to be able to be nimble and respond to these things as they come up over time. So that's an example. We then also partnered with the town of New Canaan when there were ARPA dollars, the federal dollars that came into the community. We set up a structure to kind of advise town government on how to make grants. And this community, to its credit, gave over $2 million to nonprofit organizations. You don't see that in other communities. Lots of other communities did things that were important for their own towns and cities, but it was a lot more projects that maybe would have been funded in one way or another. I think the town of New Canaan really pushed forward and said, what can we do to invest in yes, healthcare and things that Waveney Life Care and Staying Put and so on, but also with the arts and culture institutions that people have lost connection in COVID, and how can we bring them back together? So I thought that was really kind of forward thinking of the town. So that's a little bit about our behavioral health work. Let me get to these couple of slides, and then would love to open it up to Q&A and discussion. So the Behavioral Health Alliance is a partnership of over 30 organizations. Let me see if I can advance this. All right. Oh, it's going to be tiny. It's on. You know what? It's on. It's on the little flyers. There's one on each table. But think, gosh, every town department that has any skin in this game. So police department, EMT, fire, human services. The schools are part of this partnership, public and private, which is great. Many individual, kind of prevention or service organizations are part of this. It's a really exciting group, I think, because this is an example of how New Canaan is so engaged, and there's so many places to plug in, but what more can we accomplish if we're working together? So the Behavioral Health Alliance has been around for some time now. It's sort of a 2.0 of a group that existed beforehand. And we work broadly on mental health and well-being initiatives. But the first thing that we're really doing together is a community health and well-being survey. So it runs the month of October, just launched this past week. I think we already had 182 responses, something like that, which is great for the first 4 days of the survey. I was like, okay, we're inching. And it is town-wide. When I talked earlier about not having New Canaan data, our community hasn't done a survey process like this on mental health and other issues in more than 20 years. And when it was done 20 some odd years ago, it was specific to the youth population within the public schools. So this is really unique that we're doing community-wide, and it's engaging both adults and then later youth. We'll talk about kind of the second phase of the survey. So at this point, it is for anyone over the age of 18. And forgive me, these are borrowed slides. We have a research partner on this, so who is the expert, right? Our research partner has done studies of different types like this in probably 10 communities in Fairfield County, many of our neighboring communities, which is great because it means we've been able to match some of our survey questions to others in other communities. So it should offer us some interesting comparisons to data when we do eventually have information. What she's really talked to us about is this is a needs assessment. And that's, it's a point in time, right? It's gonna tell us what are some gaps in service or in knowledge or access. But I will say the group that's been helping to lead this from within the Alliance is also thinking about this as a little bit like an asset assessment, right? Where are the strengths in our community though that we can push on? What are, when you think about youth development, for example, there's always protective factors. So if a young person has a trusted adult, there are protective factors beyond their parents, right? Do they have a coach, the bus driver, janitor, their faith leader? Do they have a youth group? Do they have someone they can turn to? That's a protective factor in terms of their risk and their positive development. So we're also asking really asset-based questions in this survey to understand what is working well. So we are in phase 1. So month of October is survey month, but there's been all of this work kind of getting us to the point of developing the tool, piloting it, testing it, all of these things. We will have some initial information from our researcher at the end of the calendar year. So think December or more likely early January, just because of the holidays. We'll do a big release of the data. So what have we learned in phase 1 with our adult survey? And really have a discussion about it. Engage people, like, what does this mean? And our researcher, for example, is really excited. This is the quantitative stuff. We'll probably want to do qualitative after this, right? Dig in a focus group. I had someone on the phone the other day who we do ask questions in this survey, for example, on social media, right? What's your level of concern around social media use, either personally or with the children in your life? And they were like, okay, I want to know how many hours of screen time, and what apps do they have, you know, all of these things. And I said, okay, that's great for a focus group. If the community responds and says, yes, we're really concerned about this, then we can dig in. But we wanted to be really careful not to make this survey a laundry list that took you 45 minutes, right? It's a 5-minute survey. It's not going to be perfect, but it's going to start getting us trend line information. So phase 2 in the spring is to pilot a youth survey. So that could look quantitative again. It could look like focus groups with different student groups, maybe through, I will say in phase 1, public schools and private schools are all sending it out to their parent populations. So it's New Canaan survey, but there will be adult respondents who live outside of town but send their kids to New Canaan private schools, which was a really intentional decision so that we could just, there's no finger pointing, right? And it's just collectively like, these are the kids in our community. These are the adults moving in and through our community. We want to know how everybody's doing. So we're really heartened that the private schools are part of it to that extent, and the public schools as well, so that this gives them a lot of information. Do parents have age-appropriate information to talk about a whole host of different issues with their kids? To what degree do they think these issues are critical? And then when we get to the phase 2 with the youth themselves, are the kids going to tell us the same thing? Or are they going to tell us something different? Yeah. This is more the researcher was describing sort of survey design, question development. We did pilot testing. Statistical significance is important for us in this, right? So it's like 1,000 or so people in the community, adults. If we got 1,000 or more adults to participate in this survey, it is statistically significant, which is great. And it's important because, so I referenced other communities have been doing data collection like this for some time, and New Canaan hasn't. There are state and federal resources out there that we could tap, but we have to have the data. So Darien, for example, started doing this just as a youth survey a number of years ago. They're now on their second round of a $500,000 multi-year grant to bring more programs and prevention and other resources into their community. So we're currently leaving money on the table just because we don't have the data. And our researcher has said, you know, for whatever reason, if Connecticut is doing a project and puts in a federal grant application, they're mostly funded. And so she's feeling pretty optimistic that if we have the data, that we could really bring in some resources that then the community would shape how they're used. So there's a real opportunity there. So 1,000 or more people though, right, will get us there, and then we can say, this is statistically significant. So what topics do we cover in the survey? There's demographics in there, so the typical things you would expect, but there's also, and this kind of gets into community involvement, there's a question, for example, like how long have you lived in New Canaan? Right, so how are people faring if they just moved here? They moved here during the pandemic years, versus if they lived here for 20 years or more, right? That should tell us some interesting things. Community involvement, this is so much, I think, the fabric of New Canaan. So we want to understand, are people volunteering? Are they part of groups? Are they part of a faith community? Are those protective factors really helping? Can we show that bear out in the data? Knowledge of community-based supports. So are you aware of and or using any of these community supports? So that's everything from kind of transportation to different health services and more. Likewise, more specifically in mental health and substance use issues, are you aware of if you needed those services, where they are? Where you're getting your information from, right? So this is useful for us. Say the parents at St. Luke's say this particular newsletter is where I'm getting all of my information. And it's different from a senior in town, right? That tells us, based on what those populations may or may not need, where do we then as an alliance need to be doing outreach? Barriers to care will be really important for us to understand. And then issues of safety. We work a lot, including Scott and others, on the New Canaan Abuse Prevention Partnership and other initiatives, and so this was really an important opportunity for us to talk about safety and domestic violence. There's some ranking questions in the survey that are kind of asking you to kind of rank level of concern around different issues pertaining to health and well-being. There's questions about life satisfaction, financial stability. We didn't want this to just be around mental health specifically, but what are all of the other factors going on in your life that are gonna sort of frame how you are feeling, how your family is doing. There's questions about discrimination, attitudes, so it's pretty broad and far-reaching. And then at the very end of the survey, if you are a parent, there's 7 extra questions on the end, so hopefully it doesn't add too much length of time to the survey. But it asks you to reflect on one of your children. We unfortunately couldn't say, okay, tell me about your 5 kids and each one, how do you feel? So you have to pick one, unfortunately. You don't have to tell them which one you pick. You have to pick one kid and reflect on kind of your level of concern as it pertains to health and well-being. So, and this is where we're asking some of the social media questions, things that are more specifically around health and mental health. Do you think they have a trusted adult in their life, one or more beyond you? And then some things that should be interesting kind of around family norms, rules, modeling, things that we know are helpful in the prevention space. That's actually everything on the survey. Have I missed anything, Scott, you wanted me to?
No, that's great. I just want to encourage everybody to take the survey.
Yes.
You got our 1,000 citizens of New Canaan to participate at least.
Mm-hmm.
The more the merrier. Yeah, I think I'd open up to questions. Yeah, that's great.
One per family or each adult?
Both adults. Yeah. Or more. There's actually a question in the survey we added very late in the process, but it asks, are you part of a multi-generational household? So 3 or more generations. Because there's particular things happening in that kind of sandwich generation. We had really interesting conversations. We did, after we drafted the survey, we had 2 different community sessions for input. And then we also had kind of a couple of one-off conversations. We had a really interesting conversation with members from the disability community in town. And both a young woman and then a mother who was talking about, I have a 27-year-old who lives at home with me, is always going to live at home with me, and how do we make sure her experience is reflected and my experience as a caregiver of someone with a significant disability. And so we really tried to get at some of those particulars. And I talk to people all the time who are moving their parents here or have extended family relationships, which I think would be part of this community story. Yeah.
Excuse me, how do you do this? Only electronically or are you sending it out hard copy?
Thank you for asking that. So primarily electronically, but there are hard copies at several partner organizations because we recognize some people want to do the paper version. We didn't want to do a mailing. We put a lot of thought into that, but we figured if we did a mailing in the month of October and it's election season, it's gonna get, so not a good use of resources. But the library, the Y, Lapham Center, and Walter Stewart's are our locations for the paper surveys. And so they've been trained in, okay, here's the thing, you put it in a sealed envelope, someone from the Alliance is collecting it every week, so it's still anonymous. And then the library, the reference desk staff has been fabulous, and they've been trained more deeply in the survey, so if anyone feels like they need assistance in filling it out, a language barrier, or just, can physically need some help filling it out, they're trained to sit there with someone and help fill it out.
So is it possible for my passport care team to get copies to take out to our shut-ins?
Sure, that would be wonderful. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And we really need help on, New Canaan's great at showing up, but there are people who are just regular joiners and they're plugged into everything. So they're the ones who are gonna see this. So we really need help with how are we getting the people who are more challenging to reach? That would be wonderful.
Is this going to be offered through New Canaan, the town, where they send out information, your road is closed?
Mm-hmm. So the health department, the human services department, and Lapham all have email outreach teed up, which is good because the health department, for example, their email on Everbridge is like 1,500 people. So if they could get those people organized to respond, that would be great.
But it hasn't come out yet.
No.
Because I remember doing some survey, but I don't remember what
Yes,
it was.
and it was probably, there was a new van survey
Yes.
at the end of August, and I thought, oh no, everyone's gonna think it's the same survey. So we've talked with Jen Eielson at the health department to be really explicit. This is a very different survey. This is Canaan specific, right? It's not like a regional,
And that one was not easy to submit.
real, oh, okay.
Yeah, I finally, I filled it all out and then it wouldn't go through. So,
This one, well, you know, we have 182 people who've submitted it, so hopefully it's better.
The parking survey
Yeah.
is also just out.
Yes, the parking survey's out. I know, there could be a little survey fatigue. Hopefully we can
we don't park.
battle that on very different
I tried to
issues.
do that one and I'm going, we don't park, we live walking distance, so.
It's good, you're not part of the problem. Yeah.
Just amazing, amazing research that is taking the pulse of the Canaan in real time. It's really just phenomenal. Having said that, just from a historical point of view, you said you've been with the foundation for 16 years?
8.
8 years. I'm curious if what the needs were 8 years ago compared to what they are today.
I know. Well, and that's where it's interesting. I mean, this is going to be our starting point for a lot of the data, unfortunately. Although we can sort of piece things together, but it's not going to be apples to apples. And if you're talking about kind of the behavioral health survey specifically, or you mean like what just the needs were in town?
In general, 8 years ago.
Yeah.
How
Oh, I think so the mental health space, I can't speak to say before 8 years, like how were things going? But it seemed like things were bubbling up for sure 8 years ago when I got here. They've only intensified, unfortunately. So we feel grateful that we started this work internally years ago because we're now better positioned to respond. No one thought when we started doing this work that we would still be doing it 6-7 years later. And last year we actually launched a particular fund to make multi-year kind of commitments to doing this work for the next 5 years coming. No one on my board, when they agreed to do this 7 years ago, thought we would be in it this long on mental health. But unfortunately, it's all the more necessary. I think the other area where we've seen increased need is kind of in the human services space. So the need for financial support, kind of critical needs. Everything was exacerbated by COVID, but there's definitely other factors at play. So COVID, for example, we ended up doing a lot around food security and access, a lot of around financial assistance. The foundation for many years has housed something called the Touch a Life Fund, which is emergency financial assistance for New Canaan residents. We take referrals from the schools, human services, the churches, other nonprofit organizations, and it's to pay utilities, rent. Last week we just paid for a bunch of musical instrument rentals. We always do that every fall. There's always kids, right, and families that can't afford little Joe to be playing the trumpet and renting that all year. In the spring, we're always paying for driver's ed or tutoring or summer school. These are extra costs that aren't budgeted and families just are having a harder and harder time affording. We're also going into our 3rd year of a partnership with the New Canaan Public Schools. Dr. Lutzy kind of affectionately calls it the cookie program, because we had this discussion a couple of years ago where they came to us and said, hey, we don't know if you could do anything about this, but our food services staff is saying, like, the kids that are on free and reduced price lunches, which is a federal measure of poverty, they're still hungry after they get their standard subsidized meal. They want to go back for another slice of pizza or a cookie, so they're just normal with all of their peers and they can have that like all the other kids. And so we said, yeah, let's do something about this. This is important, and we have these resources for extra financial assistance. So we partnered with the schools and gave them a chunk of dollars that they split across all of those students' meal swipe cards. And so they have an extra $30 a month on there. And the kids don't know, but the parents know. And they're so grateful that these kids have extra access to food. We're now trying to partner with the school system and figure out what does that look like going forward. There are census for kids that need this federal poverty measure, it's about 175 kids in the school system this school year. When we started the partnership 2 years ago, it was 115 kids. And so it's up by 60 kids. That's a big chunk. And then, I said, okay, the federal poverty measure is very, very low, especially for this community. Where's this whole gray area of kids who still, their families are having a very hard time existing here in New Canaan, but they don't need that really hard cutoff. So now we're trying to figure out, is there something we can do for that kind of next level of kids and families who still really need extra support in the community? So I do think whether or not we're just paying more attention to it, or if it's if you look at those number of kids, like, that is up. So I do think we're seeing more need just around basic needs, unfortunately. Yeah.
What's the number one behavioral health issue?
Anxiety and or depression. And I'm mostly taking that from the urgent assessment program, the referrals that they're seeing, and what the school system says their school counseling staff. That's the top. Yeah.
I know under the Community Foundation, there's many small organizations and foundations that maybe a family starts or a small organization. Can you just tell us how you manage all of that?
Sure. Yeah, so thank you for bringing that up. I knew you would mention that. So community foundations are often three things. It's this kind of grant making work, the community leadership work, and then management of family philanthropy. About 80 some odd funds. So donor advised family funds. So this is in lieu of having a private foundation or a commercial fund at Schwab or Fidelity. But oftentimes actually a lot of families we work with have those things too. And then they're partnering with us on some specific piece of their philanthropy. So there's one family, for example, said, "Okay, we're doing a lot nationally. I want to have a fund with you for everything we're doing in Fairfield County." And they often lean on us to say, tell me what you're seeing in the community. Tell me what 115 grant applications are coming in. Are the causes that I care about showing up in there? Can you help be kind of my eyes and ears on the ground? So when we get those applications every year, we always bring them to all of our donor advised fund holders and say, do you want to co-invest in this? We have the resources maybe to fund half of their request, but do you want to come alongside us and boost that amount or make their request whole? So we work with families like that, but I will say everyone is a little bit different. Some are very transactional, if you will, because there's a tax benefit and they have kind of a plan. They know the causes they want to give to. We can make grants for them anywhere across the country. We're basically their back office staff. We do their tax filings and financial management, investing, all of that. And then there are other families that something new has emerged and they really want advice, or they're thinking about how to engage the next generation. So their kids, as they're getting older, they're thinking, okay, can you give me some advice? Like, how do I engage my kids in philanthropy? Can you help give me some tools to have these value-based conversations about what we care about as a family and how we put some money into that as a family every year or whatever. We have one family, for example, it's grandparents that say, okay, you guys have everything. I want you to know that you have an allotment of X from our family fund this year. And you go research what it is that you think is most important to put that money to. And then come back at Thanksgiving and you're gonna pitch us. And so then you have this family-wide conversation about, Susie is pitching animal rights and this is the thing that she wants to fund. And then Brian is pitching something around education. But you get the kids in the weeds, researching it and talking about it. And so that's been really fun to help support. We have a young philanthropist program, which is actually a school year-long program we run for high school students in town, kind of giving them the basics in what is the nonprofit sector, what are these issues in the community, how do you fund them? And the kids have the same debates as the adults do in our grant review. So, how far is this $10,000 gonna go if it's at a multi-million-dollar organization or at this one with a shoestring budget? And do we care about the reach of so many people or the impact with a few? I mean, they have fascinating conversations, and it's all very thoughtful, but similar to the adults too.
That's really great. I got a couple questions. One is, are we gonna be able to compare our data with other, like, on a state level, I'm sure, but
Mhm.
on a national level, are we gonna see, because I think of New Canaan as a fairly unique community, maybe it's not, but just apples to apples, oranges to oranges, are we gonna be able to see where we stand in some of our health, behavioral health issues?
I think so, yes, because so the benefit of working with the research partner that we are, she's pulled from different survey and assessment tools. So like there are World Health Organization kind of assessment questions in there that she can map to other things.
Oh, international, that's what you're saying,
Yeah.
Interesting.
So there are things for sure we should be able to draw comparisons. So when you were asking earlier, you know, what can we compare with, you know, happening 8 years ago or more, I think there are things that we could make some comparisons with, yeah.
And besides, you know, participation in the survey, which I want to encourage, and we'll try to do that over the month. What kind of support can a church community, a faith community, offer you and the foundation and the work you're doing in building community? Because you know, part of our, at least theory anyways, we're supposed to be salt and light, not just for ourselves, but for the larger community. How do you see faith communities integrating with this larger alliance and building healthier community?
Yeah.
Any advice for us? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think, so if it's just very superficially on the survey, like spreading the word is just so important, right? And to the point of like, there's all these surveys going on. We need people to know that this is not just some like somewhat random government, so like it's entirely anonymous, the IP address tracking is turned off, like people, you know, there's always concerns about confidentiality with these kinds of things, but also that this is so community owned and designed is really important. And so we actually have a team of sort of people who've signed up to be ambassadors for this and just share it with their friend groups and networks, their faith communities, you know, are they part of Rotary or Exchange or Men's Club, just spreading the word to say, hey, I took this, it took 5 minutes. Did you know we could bring all of these resources to town? We could understand, for once, kind of where we're at on some of these dimensions, because otherwise it's just a lot of anecdotally, I'm worried about X, Y, Z, or is this that big of an issue? And it just makes it so much harder to kind of brush it off or you know, kind of leave it in the darkness if we can't say, here's where we're at. And maybe we're gonna turn up some really great things too, right? I don't want people going into this as a fear-based thing that we're gonna turn up awful things. We turn up some really good things, and then it tells us more of what to invest in the community. I think in terms of faith partnership and community building, I mean, gosh, Scott, I feel like you're everywhere in town and you are participating in the broad, in a good way. It is so wonderful. And I mean, you didn't softball this to me, but that people feel ownership of the community and all its people, and it's really not around those institutional lines. And I feel that a lot from this community at First Press. So it's not just because I'm here, I'm saying that, but I think that means a lot. It demonstrates leadership to other people. And I think you never know, I work with people who have different opinions all the time, but I always believe there's something in common that's going to bring us together. And so I just believe in showing up broadly in community spaces, because you don't really know which coffee meeting you take is gonna go somewhere. Like if you hadn't shown up and had a conversation and then it turned into the thing. Yeah, I mean, and so I had this conversation with our board. It's like, we have to invest in having the time and space to just be out there in community, talking to people who are part of our mission in all different ways. It's really hard to measure because we don't know which of those things are going to go somewhere. But it's still our responsibility to be out there. Yeah.
Have you got a social media presence? What makes me think of that is that, like, the New Canaan moms, it's like you can find out everything on that site. And I'm just wondering if you know what your access to.
What we're doing. So the foundation, yes, is on Facebook, social media. Facebook and Instagram are kind of the lead places, and then a lot of email communication. The survey, hopefully you will see everywhere. So New Canaan moms, we met with their leadership. They're going to post about it, which is great. In terms of other media too, the New Canaanite, the Advertiser, and the Sentinel will also all be running features during the month of October and doing their particular angle on things. So like New Canaanite's gonna do a podcast soon, a bunch of different things, yeah.
How about the First Selectman's newsletter?
Right.
She's declined so far. If you want to encourage her, please do. But she felt like the appropriate place for it to go out was Health Department, Human Services, Latham. But if you want to,
New Canaan Library newsletter?
yes. So New Canaan Library is one of the 30+ organizations in Alliance. So the hope is those Alliance members all will be sending out information during the month of October. So you will hear about it somewhere. The challenge is everyone's so busy. There's so much noise. There's lawn signs, there's posters. It's serving to remind people, because it's also a survey, right? You have to sit down and take the 5 minutes on your phone or the paper version. So you will hopefully see it in the newsletter from someone from the Y where you're a member. And then when you walk into the library, you get the reminder of the poster. And then later in the month, you get the email. It's just to remind people like, yes, you've been meaning to do this all month. Please, by the 31st, actually do it.
And what in the back end is the researcher gonna do to cut down on redundancies of, I've taken it before, or somebody that's trying to game the system?
Sure. So yes, this question has come up. The trick is, because we turned off the IP tracking so that we could promise utmost confidentiality, we cannot, unless there's some identical something in there and it's starting to look weird, we can't promise that someone won't accidentally fill it out twice.
I'm thinking about that. 20 times, 30 times.
I mean, if someone really's got all the spare time to take a mental health survey over and over, I don't know. Yeah.
Everyone else start praying now.
Yeah, I'm hoping it's not a thing.
Are there more questions? I have so much appreciated this time. Let's say thanks to again, thanks, Lauren. It was really informative, and just encourage you all to do the survey. Obviously, and tell your friends about it. We'll be publishing it and encouraging people. Just remember, our next adult forum will be in 2 weeks. I think it's October 20th. Is that right? And we're having the Professor Christy Lang Hurlson, who will be talking about children and spirituality. She's the one that got the $1.5 million grant from Lilly at Villanova, and she's really cool. She'll be good too. One of our mottos is internally strong, externally focused. So you've given us some things to think about, and maybe after we get the results from the survey, we'll know more about how we call to volunteer to serve in our community in ways that are building up behavioral health and well-being. So again, thanks everybody. Go in peace, serve the Lord, and enjoy the rest of this beautiful day.
People can take the survey right now.
Yeah.
They can scan and do it 5 minutes right now.
Thanks, Kim. All right, yeah, don't leave, just fill out the survey.